Hi guys, welcome back to the Spurred podcast, and it's Wednesday, so despite the fact that it's boring international week, there's still room for some more Tottenham transfer rumours. Don't forget, if you're watching on YouTube, do give it subscribe and a bell button so you can get all your daily Spurred podcast content. And if you are watching on YouTube but you want to listen maybe in your car on the podcast, go to your favourite podcast platforms, type in the Spurred podcast, give us a follow or a subscribe there. But as I said, some transfer rumours coming your way. It's actually been a bit of a slow week for transfer rumours, and I'm not totally surprised by that. Because we brought in our new sporting director from Aston Villa last week, I think there'll be a little bit of a change around in how things work at Spurs. It'll take a few months probably to get going again, and maybe some of the journalists who have their leaks within the recruitment side at Spurs won't get so many little sources, bits of news coming their way for a little while as things sort themselves out. But there is a player who Spurs have been heavily linked with this week. It's Arthur Vermeeren, an 18-year-old Belgian midfielder. What can I tell you about him? Well, he plays for Royal Antwerp. I think that's really interesting because that is where Toby Alderweireld is playing and playing really well, taking them into the Champions League. And this player, Arthur Vermeeren, is wanted by Manchester City, Arsenal and Barcelona, amongst other teams, including, of course, Tottenham Hotspur. And I personally think that the fact that we've got Alderweireld as our ex-player at Antwerp might be a really positive thing in terms of if this young player is thinking about taking the next stage in his development. What would Alderweireld say to him? I think he'd be tempted to say, well, Ange Postecoglou at Spurs, he's not afraid to play young players in the first team. Whereas if you go to a Manchester City, if you go to a Barcelona, maybe even an Arsenal, you're not necessarily going to get in very anytime soon. So that could be a good thing for us. But what can I tell you about him? Well, from the little I've seen, I've tried to dig up a few things. Amazing vision. He's got a very Kevin De Bruyne-esque physique, actually. And I think a lot of people are jumping on that classic football manager bandwagon and calling him the next De Bruyne. But for me, he's a great passer, great crosser of the ball, as is De Bruyne, of course. He's always looking for little 1- and 2-touch moves with movement off the ball, which is very Ange Postecoglou. He wants his players to get it, give it quickly, and then make another triangle for them. And I think that's something that Vermeeren can do and does do instinctively, which is incredible for an 18-year-old. Another thing that I think could potentially endear him to Ange Postecoglou: loves pressing, loves a tackle. I've seen lots of games where he's been really the first man to really press high up the field, and then if they beat the press, also work back and put in a tackle. Loves a slide tackle, that's for sure. And as I've already said, the fact that Toby Alderweireld is there, if he loves Spurs as much as I think Toby Alderweireld loves Spurs, I'd be in this kid's ear and saying, look, if you want to make the next step, maybe Tottenham is the right place for you. As I said, Vermeeren, only 18 years old, but he's already won a cap for Belgium, and he's won loads of caps for all the Belgian youth teams before then as well. So he's very interesting. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Would you, if you were an 18-year-old Belgian midfielder, would you currently think about going for the big money at Manchester City, but potentially getting loaned out again, I guess, realistically, rather than going straight into their first team? Would you go to an Arsenal where there are kind of lots of strong midfielders there, Declan Rice, Martin Odegaard? Or would you be tempted to go to Tottenham, where they're a club clearly on the up with a manager who is happy and has talked openly about if a player is good enough, he is old enough? I don't know. I'm obviously biased, but I could see a route again now for the first time in about 5 years where these young players would be tempted to come to Tottenham. They'd also look at the way that Tottenham's academy is working at the moment. It's changed round in just a few months, but we're playing beautiful football, winning all of our games in our underage groups. And I'm not saying that Vermeeren, if he came to Spurs, would go into any of that, but it will be looked at how we're treating our young players and what's happening to our young players. And that does seem to have changed around. So interesting one to keep an eye on, that Thomas Vermeeren, because it does look like he's going to get... Sorry, Arthur Vermeeren. It does look like he's going to... getting confused with Thomas Vermaelen there, horrible ex-Arsenal player. But no, Arthur Vermeeren, 18 years old, does look like he's going to be making his move from Royal Antwerp sometime soon. Next up is a bit of news on a couple of transfer outs. I've talked about this in previous Tottenham transfer rumours. All the talk still about Pierre-Emile Hojberg and Juventus. Apparently Spurs asking for £30 million. That, to be honest, sounds about right for me in terms of a player who is kind of first change as our defensive midfielder when Bissouma's not playing. I'm assuming he's going to start for Bissouma against Fulham on Monday night. £30 million. He's a Danish international, plays every game for Denmark, scores quite a lot of goals for Denmark as well. I mean, they didn't have a great match away at San Marino yesterday, only just scoring a winner in like the 70th minute. But he's played at Bayern Munich. He's played well for Southampton. He's played well for Spurs. He's played under Pep Guardiola, who really rated him when he was a youngster. So 30 million sounds about right. Is that the kind of money that you would take if we were going to let Hojberg go in January? Let me know in the comments. What do you think? Would it be a good sale? Would that mean that's money we're able to invest somewhere else? Maybe someone younger, maybe somebody with the attributes to play that role a bit more similarly to Bissouma, i.e. take the ball on the half turn and beat the press and then bring other players into play. Whereas Hojberg, as we know, is a little bit more safe on the ball, a little bit more conservative, a little bit more sideways and backwards. So would £30 million be enough for you to take what I would say is a bit of a risk? Because we know what Hojberg can bring. There's no risks really in terms of Hojberg coming into the team. We know that he's safe. We know that he's going to win the ball back. We know that he's going to press. But is 30 million enough for you to say, okay, let's take that money and reinvest it elsewhere? And if so, also, where would you reinvest it? Who would you like to see come in as squad players to work around Bissouma in that defensive midfield role? The other one I mentioned, obviously, Eric Dier being linked with Roma again. I think this is a fascinating one because I can absolutely see Eric Dier going to Roma if Jose Mourinho stays there. But all the talk is about Mourinho not staying after his contract ends, which I think is at the end of this season. They've not had a good start to the season. Mourinho's already done a classic thing where he's like, oh, we have not had a bad start and people are questioning my job, but I need to demand loyalty from them because I stayed when I got a huge offer from Saudi Arabia this summer. It's classic Jose trying to kind of deflect the problems. And yeah, like I said, if he stayed at Roma, I could absolutely see Eric Dier going there, and maybe even Jose playing a three at the back so Dier can play as the middle of those three, which is probably his best position. But if Jose leaves, it looks like it might happen, I cannot see Eric Dier going to Roma, and therefore I would more... there'd been some links with Eric Dier going back to Sporting Lisbon. That's a move I could see happening if the Roma thing doesn't happen. What do you think about Eric Dier? I should say this links actually into something I wanted to talk about a bit later on, even though it's not transfer rumours. But Christian Romero got an ankle injury last night playing for Argentina. They won 2-0, but he was taken off just into the second half with what looked like a sore ankle injury. He had it in the first half. They kind of sent him back on. They iced it apparently during half time. Then he came back on, but he only lasted about 5 minutes. It's the worst thing ever when they go on international break and get injured. I really hope it's not that serious and they were just taking precautions. But it's worth bringing up at this point because will Eric Dier be first change if Christian Romero is injured and can't play on Monday night against Fulham? In which case, how would Dier do if he came in? And would he be given a chance if Romero was injured to show that he's better than currently Ange thinks he is? I don't know. I kind of wonder whether Ben Davies might be first change at centre back there. I don't think he'll risk Ashley Phillips. Anyway, those things are inherently linked, but of course Eric Dier's contract does run out in the summer, and it doesn't look like anyone is going to be. He's not going to be signing one. I don't think we've got one on the table for him at the moment. So yeah, that's how it's linked with the Romero situation. I thought it was worth bringing up the Sheikh Jassim Qatar situation at Manchester United briefly, because that obviously there's links that he might be interested in buying Spurs now that he's not. Now that he's pulled out from the Manchester United bid. He bid £5 billion for control of Manchester United, and the Glazers balked at it in the end. I don't think the Glazers want to sell up, and now there are rumours that maybe he'll look at Spurs next. Conflicting reports, some journalists saying that could be something that happens, some journalists saying that he has no interest currently in buying another club, despite links to Spurs and maybe Inter Milan. Would you be happy getting a nation state owning the club and kind of following the likes of PSG, Manchester City and Newcastle? It's not something that sits brilliantly with me, but also I do understand the, if you can't beat them, join them situation. But it's not the ideal scenario, but it does feel like it's where football's going. The Sheikh Jassim thing's interesting, though, because he claims he's not backed by the Qatari government, but he very clearly is. I'd be interested to know what you think about that. It would obviously free up funds, that's for sure. But as Chelsea have shown, having funds freed up and being able to spend £1 billion willy-nilly doesn't necessarily work. Certainly not in the short term. Finally, a few reports I've seen from journalists saying that Victor Osimhen from Napoli could be interesting Spurs. Now, I don't doubt that he would interest Spurs. He's an unbelievable number 9, one of the best in the world, alongside kind of Kane and Lewandowski. We do have some money, I think, burning in our pockets from the Harry Kane sale, but I just don't think we'd be willing to spend what it would take to get him. I think we'd have to spend £150 million. I don't think we would. I also don't think Osimhen's first choice would be Spurs at this point. And I also don't think that Ange Postecoglou is the kind of manager who wants that kind of huge ego player to come in. I could be wrong. I'm sure he wouldn't turn him down, but it's just not one that I think sits with me. What do you think? It's a report that's doing the rounds. He's also obviously interesting other clubs as well. Liverpool are being talked about, Arsenal. But is that a player that you think would ever come to Spurs? It seems unlikely to me. Let me know in the comments what you think. Guys, thank you so much for watching and listening. As I said, if you're watching on YouTube, then do find me on podcast platforms, The Spurred On Podcast, and vice versa. On YouTube, I'm at youtube.com/@BarnabySlater_. And let's not forget, come on you Spurs.